Hey guys, tonight, we slip quietly behind the rice paper screens of old Edo, what we now call Tokyo, and into a world where bedtime didn't involve Netflix, but maybe a nearby fire pot and a robe with a hidden charm sewn into the hem. Outside, the lanterns flicker low and the streets grow still, save for the soft tread of the night watch and the rustle of bamboo in the wind. Inside, the tatami mats wait cool and flat beneath woven straw sandals, and somewhere someone's folding their day away. Now don't get too comfortable yet, because if you were living here wearing the wrong thing to bed, could mean waking up both embarrassed and frozen stiff, or worse, married. You probably won't survive this without an extra layer of cotton and a healthy respect for sleeping customs that are older than most castles in Europe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all listen, from whether you're on a futon in Fukuoka or unwinding in Wisconsin. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch in the corner of a small wood-framed room. The walls are sliding panels of shoji paper stretched tight across wooden lattices. The scent of cedar lingers in the beams, and beneath your toes, the tatami mat sighs with every shift of weight. A brazier purrs in the center of the room, faintly warming the air. It's quiet, save for the low murmur of someone folding cloth in the next room. Someone is preparing for bed. And no, it's not about fuzzy pajamas or oversized t-shirts pilfered from a high school sports team. You're watching someone reach for a yukata, a light, unlined cotton kimono that will become their bedclothes tonight. Loose, soft, and quick-drying yukata were originally meant for bathhouses, but during the Edo period, 1603-1868, they transformed into the go-to sleepwear for most folks. They weren't flashy, no elaborate crests or 15-foot-long sashes, just a simple robe tied with a soft sash, or koshihimo, around the waist. And maybe, if the person's lucky or cold, a layer of quilted padding called a tanzen folded nearby, just in case the night got frosty. Now, if you're picturing silk and elegance, slow your roll. Silk was for day wear, for showing off in the street, in the tea house, or in front of your in-laws. Sleeping in silk was a bit like eating birthday cake for breakfast, luxurious, sure. But most people didn't do it, and those who did were probably rich, eccentric, or both. The average Edo-era sleeper kept things simple. After all, comfort and practicality ruled the night. Loose sleeves, breathable cotton, and enough freedom of movement to wrestle a futon during a restless dream about tax collectors or rampaging tanuki. Historians still argue whether everyone owned a separate yukata strictly for sleeping, or just used the same one post-bath and called it a day, or rather night. Some say people had house yukata for lounging and sleeping, and nice yukata for festivals or errands. Others believe there was a certain fluidity in how often these things got washed. So let's not overthink it. You watch as the figure carefully folds their day robe and sets it aside. The yukata slips on in one smooth movement, left side always over right, of course. The opposite is used only for dressing the dead, which, needless to say, is a faux pas you want to avoid in every time period. Then comes the sash, tied simply not too tight. Comfort is the goal. You don't want to be reenacting a kabuki costume change at 2 in the morning because you rolled over wrong and bound yourself like a dumpling. As they settle into the futon, just a thin mattress on the floor, covered with crisp sheets, and a blanket folded just so you catch a glimpse of a small item tucked near the pillow, a personal charm, a slip of paper inscribed with prayers, maybe even a comb. Why? Because in this world, the boundary between waking and sleeping isn't just a blur, it's a threshold, and what you wear as you cross it matters. You lie down beside them. Figuratively, of course, this is still history, not reality TV. You feel the room exhale, the fire pot flickering low. The yukata rustles faintly with every breath. Outside the city of Edo, sleeps in layers wooden houses, winding alleys, straw sandals neatly lined at doorways. But here in this little room, Someone has dressed for the journey into dreams. And you're just getting started. The night deepens slowly. It doesn't collapse like a curtain. It settles the way ink darkens on washi paper, one layer at a time. You stir slightly on your borrowed tatami mat, blinking into the soft dark. From somewhere beyond the shutters, a bamboo fountain clacks, tipping back and forth to mark the hours more gently than any clock. You hear someone shuffle past yukata, whispering with every step. No clunky slippers, no padded socks, just bare feet and soft cotton, because bedtime in Edo, Japan was not about luxury. It was about rhythm, and rhythm in Edo everything. Right down to when you slipped out of your robe. Because while the yukata was the norm for sleepwear, bedtime didn't look the same for everyone, not even close. In merchant homes, for example, where space was tight and walls were mostly suggestions getting ready for bed, involved a kind of choreography. Grandma folds the bedding. Dad extinguishes the lantern. Someone somewhere coughs politely to remind everyone that snoring is not a competitive sport. Your eyes wander toward another mat, this one more elaborate. The bedding is thicker layered. The yukata nearby has finer stitching. It's padded. Watair. That's not just sleepwear. It's a winter necessity. Think of it as the Edo version of a wearable duvet. Quilted cotton, carefully hand-stitched, sometimes dyed indigo for insect resistance. A little stiff at first, but it softens with use, like most good things. A few richer folks even had them lined with silk. You might think, isn't that a fire hazard? Yes, and also decadently warm. But here's the kicker: nightclothes weren't just for comfort. They were also a signal. If someone knocked on your door after sunset and you greeted them in your yukata, it meant, I'm done for the day. Like sending a text that just says, EK, effective, subtle, immediate. Now shift your view to the other side of town, to a samurai household. This one's dimmer, simpler. The hearth glows faintly, but the air smells sharper, laced with iron from a recently polished blade. The man sleeping here wears his yukata like armor, loose, yes, but precise. His sword lies just beside the futon. Not in reach, but not far either. You wonder if his yukata has family crests. Maybe, maybe not. Historians still argue whether samurai maintained status-marked sleepwear, or if bedtime like death made everyone equal. Some say crests stayed even on informal wear. Others think warriors preferred anonymity at night. After all, shadows can't read embroidery. Now imagine you're back in a more humble home, a farmer's hut in the outskirts of Edo. The air here smells of rice, straw smoke, and warm earth. The yukata, waiting on the peg, isn't new. It's patched. A sleeve is shorter than the other. One corner frays into tassels. And it's beautiful. Because wear tells a story. You pick it up and feel the weight of sun sweat and seasons stitched into the threads. This yukata has seen winter frost and summer rain. It has warmed tired bodies and dried wet hair. No silk, no decoration, just usefulness. And it gets used for sleep. Again and again and again. A mother nearby helps her child into a too big robe, tying the sash twice to keep it from trailing in the dirt. The child protests, wants to sleep in their day clothes. She insists. Even now in bedtime there are rituals. And in rituals, comfort. But not everyone wears robes. In brothels, yes, let's go there briefly. Bedtime was a costume change too, but a calculated one. Courtesans often had designated nightwear, made of subtly perfumed fabrics. Even in slumber, image mattered. There's one diary entry where a client recounts how the folds of a courtesan's sleeping robe were sewn with silver thread to catch the moonlight. You can't make this stuff up. Meanwhile, in temples, monks wore simpler wraps, less yukata, more linen shifts. Humble, uniform, designed not to seduce, but to shed ego. To remind the body that sleep was not escape, but surrender. A bow to the rhythm of nature. And remember those wandering pilgrims you passed in town earlier. The ones with wide hats and walking staffs. They sometimes slept in their travel robes, cloaks doubled as blankets, heads resting on tiny wooden pillows. One traveler even stitched a prayer into his sleeve before laying down beneath a temple gate. That was his yukata. That was his message to the night. There's something poetic about that, sleeping in the very cloth that carried your footprints. Back in the city, the drums signaled the hour. A low, hollow thump from a tower you can't see but always hear. The final yukata of the night is being tied. Another layer of cloth. Another act of pause. The streets hush as the city collectively exhales. You roll onto your side. Your borrowed robe shifts across your shoulders. Soft, familiar now. The same cotton that once felt foreign now carries your shape. And you understand something. In Edo, what you wore to bed wasn't just about temperature. It wasn't just fabric. It was identity. It was closure. A message to the world and to yourself that the day had ended, and tomorrow, a new robe, a new rhythm, a new chance to fold yourself into the night just right. The moon outside your window now hangs like a pale ink smudge on rice paper, and the faint creak of the wood beneath your mat reminds you that Edo nights are never truly silent. Somewhere a gate squeals shut. Somewhere else a cat yowls like it knows a secret. And inside your little room, you exhale. Not because you're tired, but because you're starting to settle into the rhythm of this other time, this other life. Now let's shift focus, not to what people wore to bed, but what they slept under. Because if robes were the punctuation marks of the day, the bedding was the actual sentence. And in Edo, Japan, that sentence was usually written in cotton. You probably picture futons. Good. That's correct, but not quite the plush, thick mattresses we roll out today. The original futon was closer to what you'd call a padded quilt, about the width of a yoga mat, with another futon draped over the sleeper like a blanket. Laid directly on tatami floors, of course. No elevated beds. No springs. Just floor mat you. And if you're lucky, a makura, a pillow. But hold on. Don't get excited. Makura weren't the plush, marshmallowy delights of modern bedding. These were often wooden. Yep, wooden. Or filled with buckwheat hulls or beans or tiny bits of bamboo. Good for airflow, great for posture. Not so great if you were hoping to wake up without a line pressed into your cheek like a family crest. Some pillows even came with side compartments, little drawers for hairpins or keepsakes. Because if you're gonna sleep like a samurai, you may as well store your dagger next to your dreams. One particularly curious tidbit, courtesans and women with elaborate hairstyles sometimes used special takamakura elevated headrests designed to preserve their complicated coifs overnight. Imagine balancing your head on a little lacquered platform with a neck roll, hoping your top knot doesn't flatten. Beauty sleep, more like precision stunt nap. Historians still argue whether everyone used futons year-round, or whether straw mats and layered robes substituted in warmer months. Some sources suggest commoners rolled up in spare yukata when cotton was too dear or out of season. Others point out that regional climate dictated much of this. What worked in snowy Aizu wouldn't make sense in steamy Kyushu. And, oh yes, mosquito nets. Kaya. Picture a gossamer tent hung from bamboo rods draped around the sleeping area like a whispered secret. Insects in Edo were not just a nuisance, they were a plague. The kaya net wasn't just protection, it was relief. Richer households even perfumed them with burning incense nearby. Imagine dozing off beneath a veil that smells faintly of cedar and chrysanthemum. Your dreams guarded not by nights, but by cloth and smoke. The kaya also had another layer of privacy. When you're sleeping in a one-room home with 3 generations, the net offers a soft illusion of solitude. Not real walls, but a boundary nonetheless. You hear footsteps again. Someone tucks in. Someone else coughs, then quiets. The fabric of sleep stretches across the neighborhood, an invisible quilt stitched together by shared routines and sleepy murmurs. Now picture this, a guest in a merchant household. Not quite family, not quite stranger. They're handed a futon and a folded yukata, along with a smile and a slight bow. The message is unspoken, but clear. We welcome you, but you're on your own if the mosquitoes find you first. You lay out your bedding quietly, like you've done it 100 times. Smooth the futon, fold the robe at the edge, align your sandals neatly near the door. These small motions aren't habits yet, but they feel ancient, like they've waited centuries for you to do them just right. Now let's peek inside and in Ahatago, where travelers rest between distant provinces. A flurry of dusty yukata tattered bedding and tired shoulders. Everyone sleeping shoulder to shoulder in long shared rooms with only a screen or a pillow barrier offering the illusion of privacy. If someone snores too loud, you toss a sandal at them. Gently, probably. And the innkeeper sleeps near the entrance, just in case someone decides to sneak out without paying. There's something beautiful in the imperfection of it all. The blankets might be uneven, the mats might be thin, but there's community here. A shared rhythm, a tacit agreement that night is sacred and temporary, and morning always brings rice noise and responsibilities. In temples, monks prepare their sleeping areas with almost military precision. Mats rolled with exactness, bedding folded with intent. Sleep here is not indulgence, it's part of the practice, a ritual of humility. And the yukata simple and white doubles as a reminder of impermanence. White being the color of death in Japanese tradition, a reminder each sleep is a tiny death, each morning a tiny rebirth. And in the homes of the elite, the futons might be thicker, the yukata might be embroidered, the nets might be scented, but beneath it all, cottonwood breath, they too surrender to the same silence. Because sleep in the end is the most democratic of acts. The daimyo snores, the farmer snores, the child drools on the same kind of mat as the scribe. You shift again, pulling the futon up higher as a breeze brushes through the wooden slats of your wall. Somewhere, a neighbor turns in their sleep. The rhythm continues, and you realize the nightdress, the mat, the net, the careful tuck of a fold. None of it is for show. It's for continuity, for connection, to the people you live beside, to the centuries behind you, to the next breath you take before drifting into dream. The faint blue of dawn has not yet curled over the horizon, but the village stirs. A rooster tries its best to beat the sun to the punch. Somewhere nearby, water sloshes into a basin. And you're still nestled in your futon, one eye open, half listening to the creak of a neighbor's sandals on the boards outside your window. But before we talk about morning, let's linger just a bit longer in the liminal space where waking meets rest, the in-between. Because for people in Edo Japan, the boundary between sleep and wakefulness wasn't just a blink. It was a ritual. When you finally stretch beneath your mosquito net, you feel the tug of habit. Not yours yet, but someone's. The apprentice folding his bedding, the merchant's wife brushing her hair by candlelight, the child practicing his morning bows before breakfast. And each of them wears the same thing they wore to bed, the humble, versatile yukata. Think of it as a robe, but also pajamas. Also loungewear, also your towel, also sometimes funeral attire. It's doing a lot. By the 18th century, the yukata was ubiquitous, lightweight cotton, unlined, worn by nearly everyone. Originally designed as bathwear, it quickly took on other roles. You'd bathe in the evening at the neighborhood sento public bath, dry off and wear your yukata home. And for many, that was your sleepwear too. Fresh, light, and easy to move in. The ultimate multitasker. No flannel footy pajamas here, just breathable cotton tied neatly with a sash. The hem brushing your ankles as you padded around your tatami room. Historians still argue whether yukata were universally worn at night, or if class and region affected the bedtime routine. Some aristocrats likely slipped into more formal layers, a padded kusode, perhaps with silk linings and delicate patterns. Others might have slept in just a nagajubin, the under-kimono worn so long it felt like a second skin. And in households with more bodies than bedding, robes weren't just sleepwear, they were shared heat. Families huddled close layers of yukata, mingling like fallen leaves in autumn, the warmth of one person spilling into the dreams of another. Now you shift focus to the wealthier classes, the samurai, the high-ranking merchants, the bureaucrats of the Tokugawa regime. In their homes, robes at night were still yukata, but elevated. You might see indigo-dyed cotton or intricate family crests stitched near the collar. Patterns could include waves, bamboo, or cranes, not just fashion meaning. A reminder of lineage of loyalty, even at rest. One particularly charming fringe detail in colder seasons. Wealthy households might wear double-layered yukata, or tanzin, thicker padded robes. Like sleeping in your favorite duvet, only better tailored. Think of it as a wearable kotatsu blanket, minus the electric heater. Meanwhile, for children sleeping yukata, were often hand-me-downs, soft from use, patched with love, and sometimes decorated with playful stencils. Rabbits fans, lucky pine trees. You can imagine a little one slipping into theirs with sleepy ceremony, clutching a rice pillow and curling up next to mom, already snoring softly like a lullaby with legs. And for the record, no zippers, no buttons, just the gentle pull of a sash tied snugly at the waist. If it comes undone at night, that's just life reminding you that you don't need to hold everything together all the time. You wander in your thoughts toward the inns and traveler stations again. Picture a dusty road-weary farmer stepping inside, slipping off his straw sandals, and being handed a borrowed yukata. It smells faintly of cedar soap and sun-bleached cloth, maybe a little mildew, maybe a lot of memories. He changes behind a screen, folds his workrobe into a neat triangle, and emerges softer, simpler, almost anonymous. Because here at night, everyone looks the same. Robes and futons, steam and silence. Sleep is the great equalizer. Back in your little Edo village, the yukata's work isn't done at sunrise. You wear it as you ladle miso soup. You wear it as you sweep your entryway. You might even keep it on if you're just heading to the bathhouse or fetching tofu. It's not flashy, but it's familiar. And once it's worn through, you don't toss it. You patch it, you re-dye it, or you cut it into strips and use it to bind your sandals or wrap your lunch. Because in Edo Japan, even your sleepwear gets reincarnated. There's a proverb whispered by grandmothers over tatami floors. Even an old yukata remembers the body, meaning it holds your shape, your scent, your dreams. A second skin that wraps around memory as much as it wraps around you. And when the robe finally can't be used, it might become part of a patchwork, borrow ragged stitched textiles passed from generation to generation, as artful as they were practical. So in a way, your sleep clothes become your heirloom. Now as you sip the last of your imaginary barley tea and feel the edges of this story soften, remember this: the people of Edo didn't dress for bed the way we do. They didn't have matching pajama sets or plush duvets with corner ties. But they had something else, ritual repetition and fabric that remembered. And maybe that's better. You glance over at the yukata folded beside your mat. You imagine the feel of it brushing your skin, the weightless drape, the quiet presence of cotton, shaped by generations of sleepers before you. You lie back, let the story settle, and you think this robe isn't just cloth. It's a conversation between you and the night. The light outside has warmed to a gentle gold, and the village breathes deeper now, fully awake, but not yet hurried. You stretch, rise, and feel the yukata's soft rustle follow your movements like a whisper. You're not done thinking about it. Not yet. Because here's the thing, when you wear something to bed every night, it doesn't stay just clothing. It becomes a rhythm. And in Edo Japan, rhythm mattered. Let's step back, way back, and think about the shape of a day in Edo. The average person didn't scroll their way into sleep. They didn't watch a midnight crime documentary or forget they had laundry in the washer. They watched the light change. They watched their neighbors light lanterns. They waited for the frogs to start their gossip chorus in the rice fields. And they changed into their yukata. Even the act of disrobing from the day's wear was slow. deliberate. You might sit at a low mirror stand, untie your sash, fold your outer kimono just so smooth your underlayers, and then slip into the sleep robe like you were lowering yourself into calm water. For women especially, there was a moment of transition. The ornate obi was removed. Hairstyles were unpinned. Hair flowed down the back like ink or clouds. Earrings came off if you had them. And then the yukata soft cotton, tied loosely, practical, simple, soothing. A bedtime ritual that didn't need lavender spray to feel calming. Historians still argue whether women's sleepwear in Edo was significantly different from men's. Some woodblock prints suggest not it was the same robe adjusted by taste and touch. Others insist that women sometimes wore layered kosode even at night, or draped lighter robes over the yukata for modesty, especially in shared households. Either way, it wasn't about looking cute for bedtime selfies. It was about warmthies and the private quiet of slipping into yourself. And speaking of modesty, yes, there's debate about what was worn underneath. Or rather, what wasn't. In summer, probably nothing. In winter, maybe an extra wrap or a second layer of cotton. But Edo bedtime fashion didn't fuss about underthings the way modern sleepwear does. No tight elastic, no brand logos, just cloth and air and skin. The yukata was not just practical, it was sensory. Its touch told you the season. The smell told you whether it had dried in sunlight or beside a smoky hearth. The way it clung or didn't reminded you whether you'd worked too hard that day or whether it was time to mend the stitching. That robe became a measure of your body, your mood, even your memories. And now here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some families embroidered tiny protective symbols on the inside hem of sleep robes. Things like cranes for long life, pine needles for endurance, tiny, almost invisible stitches, charms whispered into fabric. You'd never see them unless you were folding it inside out. But they were there, tucked into the seams like secret lullabies. Meanwhile, kids, well, if they were lucky, they got robes stitched from old yukata scraps, pieced together in soft layers like sleepy patchwork armor. Sometimes those robes were dyed with persimmon juice, not just for color, but because persimmon had antibacterial properties and repelled insects. Science and bedtime cuddles Edo style. And what about the weather? Japan has seasons, real seasons. Not just hot and hotter, or rain and more rain. So your yukata rotated with the calendar. Summer yukata were airy and thin. Winter yukata got thicker, often layered with a cotton lining. And during particularly bitter nights, you might layer over a tanzen, the padded winter robe that made you look like a quilted dumpling, but felt like sleeping in a warm hug. Add a kotatsu, a low-heated table with a thick blanket, and now you're in a full-on Edo sleep cocoon. You tuck your legs under the warmth, maybe doze with your robe half slipping off your shoulder, a brush of wind sneaking through the sliding door panels. And if you were a traveler, you had to bring your robe with you, or hope the innkeeper was generous. Inns often provided simple yukata for guests, like bathhouses did. But if you were picky or proud, you packed your own. One that smelled like home. One that held your body's memory better than any rented cloth could. You might fold it neatly and wrap it in a cloth bundle tied with practiced hands. Place it by your mat. Unroll it at dusk. Sleep in it like it was a second skin, then fold it again with reverence at sunrise. And maybe, just maybe, it had a message stitched into its hem. Or maybe it was worn at the shoulders where your child once climbed you like a tree. Maybe the sash still carried a faint trace of the pine incense you burned the night your spouse returned from a long trip. Maybe it wasn't just a robe. Maybe it was a map. You lie back on your imagined tatami mat, your own mental yukata brushing your ankles. The village outside is now in full swing. Someone is hawking tofu. Someone else is sharpening a sickle on a whetstone. The smell of miso floats through the alleyways like edible fog. But you're still half in your robe, because in Edo Japan, the night doesn't end with sleep. It lingers. It stretches into morning rituals, into robes that move from futon to doorway to bathhouse and back again. And now you realize sleepwear wasn't a category. It was a continuum, a way of wrapping yourself in ritual, of reminding yourself that you are, in fact, still here, still breathing, still folding dreams into cotton. You're still sitting with the weight of the yukata on your shoulders, real or imagined, when the next layer of the Edo bedtime puzzle reveals itself. Because sure, you now know what people wore to bed, but where did they go to bed? It's time to step inside the home, or rather, onto it. Because if you're imagining a Western-style bedroom with a big squeaky bed blankets to the ceiling and a bunch of aggressively decorative pillows, go ahead and erase that. You're not sleeping in a box spring. You're sleeping on the floor, and not just any floor, tatami. Straw mats thick enough to soften the earth, tightly bound in soft green rushes that smell like summer grass and temples. Your entire life happens on tatami meals, naps, gossip, work, prayer. So it's only natural that you sleep there too. Now let's get cozy. The sun is down. The lanterns are lit with oil or candlelight, dim and flickering. You pad across the floor in your yukata, loosen the sash, and start preparing your futon. Not a mattress in a metal frame. A true Japanese futon is more like a thick, quilted blanket you unroll on the tatami. Soft enough to cushion your spine, but firm enough to keep your back aligned after a day of carrying buckets of water weaving cloth. Or if you're elite, sitting in rigid stillness while writing poetry with an ink brush, you layer a shikibutan bottom mattress, a kakabutan, the top cover, and maybe a small buckwheat pillow. Firm, not fluffy. None of this pillow top sleep number magic. Just grains and gravity. And the whole bed. It gets folded and stored every morning. Because space in Edo homes was limited. You couldn't afford to dedicate an entire room to sleep. So your bedding had to be as flexible as your schedule. Mornings were for rolling folding, airing out the futon in the sun to chase away moisture and mites. Nighttime was for building it again, like recreating a nest each day from memory. This ritual itself was a lullaby, a physical signal to your body that rest was coming. Now you might ask, what if you're not alone? Good question. If you're married, you and your spouse probably sleep on separate futons, pushed together or apart, depending on mood space, and maybe how badly someone snored that night. If you're poor, you might all sleep in one room. Siblings, grandparents, the neighbor's cat, all together under shared quilts. It wasn't romantic. It was practical. Warmth was scarce. Space was tighter. So people stacked together like futon sardines. Historians still argue whether this proximity helped families bond, or just gave everyone more reasons to fake snoring when the baby cried. Some believe it deepened social cohesion. Others say it just made for more awkward morning routines. Either way, there was no my room, my rules. The whole house breathed together, even in sleep. But wait, what about privacy? Enter the folding screen. The byobu, or tsuitate. Decorative, yes, but also functional. A way to carve out a bit of visual solitude. You could set one up around your sleeping spot. Maybe hang a gauzy mosquito net during summer, and pretend just for a few hours that the world didn't include your brother's terrible foot smell, or your neighbor's endless throat clearing. And what about light? Lanterns were usually blown out before bed, not just for ambiance, but for safety. Fires in Edo were no joke. A dropped lamp could erase your whole neighborhood faster than you could shout bakufu. So, darkness was embraced. In summer, windows might stay open, just bamboo slats between you and the world. You drift off to the lullaby of frog cicadas and the occasional thief tiptoeing by. In winter, that's where the magic of layering came in. If your robe wasn't enough, you might snuggle under extra futongawa quilt covers, or line your futon with straw mats beneath to block the cold from seeping up from the floor. Some even used heated stones or charcoal braziers, carefully placed, of course. Because again, no one wants a midnight fire drill. And speaking of comfort, here's a quirky tidbit. Some people slept with a wooden neck pillow called a makura. Yup, you heard that right. a small wooden stand with a padded cloth top designed to protect elaborate hairstyles from flattening overnight. Not exactly plush, but hey, beauty hurts even in the Edo period. Geisha and courtesans were experts at this. Their hair was sculpted into works of lacquered art, sometimes taking hours to create. Sleeping on a regular pillow was a crime against style. So they perched their necks on these makura like graceful flamingos. It worked, mostly, unless you had a dream about somersaulting and woke up bald. Now what if you were sick? Then your sleeping space became a mini clinic. Friends and family would gather around your futon, bring rice porridge, light incense, say prayers, tell stories. They might hang charms above your mat or place salt at the corners for protection. Your sleepwear might be changed to something ceremonial, a robe stitched with auspicious symbols or scented with camellia oil. Sleep wasn't just rest, it was healing. And finally, what if you couldn't sleep? Well, you might listen to a storyteller. Some families had bedtime tales passed down like heirlooms. Ghost stories, love stories, tales of foxes that stole faces or lanterns that blinked. You'd lie on your futon, the yukata tucked around your legs, and drift off mid-sentence. Others just listened to the wind through the bamboo. Because in Edo, sleep wasn't about blackout curtains and melatonin gummies. It was about rhythm, wind, cotton, tatami, a single shell bead pressed into the wrist of your yukata, a sigh in the dark, a dream shared by moonlight. The wind shifts a little outside, brushing softly through the bamboo thicket, like a careful listener who's heard just enough to want more. You're still curled beneath your cotton yukata, warmed by the memory of tatami beneath your back, but now it's time to lift the edge of the curtain and peer into another room of the Edo night, the world of the night watchers. Because while you're dreaming of floating lanterns and fireflies, someone else is very much awake. In the city's especially bustling Edo itself, night didn't mean silence. Not entirely. Sure, things slowed down, but life didn't hit pause just because the sky turned indigo. Someone had to keep the fires from spreading. Someone had to guard the streets. And someone definitely had to make sure the rice thieves weren't making off with your dinner. So while most folks were climbing into their futons, the Yoriki higher-ranking samurai police and the doshin, the foot patrol guys, were heading out into the alleyways with lanterns swinging sandals, tapping and brows furrowed like someone had just hidden a crime behind a folding screen. They wore short coats, called haikeishi happy, padded thick, and embroidered with their group crests. Over these sometimes came hoods or straw hats depending on the weather, and they'd often wear fundoshi, loincloths, under shorter robes or trousers if they expected to be on the move or get wet. It wasn't sleepwear, but it was nightwear, and while we're here, let's talk about one of the most iconic nighttime uniforms of all the firemen. Edo was a city of wood and paper, thatched roofs, bamboo screens, oil lamps, open hearths. You name it, it was flammable. And with narrow alleyways, tall buildings, and a distinct lack of modern plumbing, one little ember could become an entire district's undoing. So enter the haikshi, the Edo firefighters. These guys didn't sleep easy. They often stayed up in fire watch towers or patrolled in shifts, listening for the cry of kaji to fire. Their uniforms were layered cotton jackets soaked in water before duty, literally drenched. So if a burning beam fell on them, it hissed instead of ignited. That thick jacket, called a haikshi banten. When dry, it was stiff and almost armor-like. When soaked, it weighed a ton but offered life-saving seconds in the chaos of fire. Some historians argue that the haikshi were more heroic daredevils than disciplined professionals. Others see them as local legends with their own moral codes and rivalries, almost like neighborhood superheroes, minus the capes, plus a lot of yelling and splinters. Either way, they didn't sleep in yukata. They didn't sleep much at all. Back inside the home, if you were lucky enough to be a merchant or an artisan, your night might still involve late work, sewing, ink brush repairs, preparing tomorrow's goods. The glow of an Andon lamp paper-covered lantern lit many a midnight endeavor. There's even evidence that people expected to wake in the middle of the night. like on purpose. This wasn't insomnia. This was segmented sleep. You'd go to bed after dusk, sleep a few hours, then wake in the middle of the night maybe to pray, maybe to sip tea, maybe to sneak in a romantic conversation with the person, one futon over. Then you'd sleep again until sunrise. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was a social norm or just a byproduct of candlelit boredom. But the idea that sleep came in 2 acts common throughout pre-industrial societies, and Edo Japan was no exception. So what did people do in that middle of the night limbo? Read, write, visit a neighbor, tell stories, stare into the dark, and listen to the frogs say things no one understood, but everyone believed. Or they might do something a little more superstitious. Because nighttime wasn't just about sleep. It was about things that traveled after dark. Foxes with too many tails, lanterns that blinked back at you, women with no feet who stood too long in the same spot. Yeah, you didn't always want to be the last one awake. So while you lay there in your nice warm futon, think of the single mother down the alley who sleeps with a broom next to her mat, not for sweeping, but for protection. Think of the child who hides his wooden toy horse under the pillow for luck. Think of the widow who wears her late husband's yukata to bed, because it keeps the dreams away. These are not just garments. They are talismans, armor, comforts, rituals wrapped in cotton. Some garments were even embroidered with little charms, threaded kanji for health, or long life stitched into the seams. You couldn't see them, but you felt them. Tiny hopes folded into your sleeves. And speaking of charm, let's not forget the netsuki. Okay, technically not bedtime wear, but still part of the night story. Netsuke were little carved toggles used to fasten things to your sash medicine pouches, purses, pipe cases. While you might take them off to sleep, people often kept them close, especially if they were carved from lucky materials like ivory or rootwood. Some were shaped like frogs, others like laughing demons. Some, let's just say, wouldn't pass TikTok's content guidelines, but each had a story, a wish, a warning. So you tuck yours under your folded yukata and exhale. The drums have stopped. The watchmen are switching shifts. Your neighbor has finally stopped coughing. And just outside, a cat walks the roofline like it owns the night. Your yukata whispers around your shoulders. The futon cradles your hips. The wind smells faintly of plum blossoms and rain. And sleep. Sleep comes back for its second act. Soft, steady, ready. The second act of sleep tastes a little sweeter. You've been here before. Eyes half-lidded, the night thick with dreams, and tatami scent drifting somewhere between the warmth of your futon and the cooler edge of the room. There's a moment when you're neither awake nor asleep, just floating like a lantern bobbing down a river during Obon. But the night isn't over yet. Not in Edo. And especially not for those who lived closer to the edge. Let's wander out of the cozy middle-class townhouses for a moment and toward the lives that ran along the margins, the people whose bedtime clothing was dictated less by custom and more by necessity. Imagine a laborer shirtless in summer, his day's sweat not fully washed away. His sleeping robe is a thin patched cotton, almost translucent, in places more whole than weave. No sash, no futon, just a straw mat and a blanket folded from yesterday's rice sacks. His head rests on a wooden pillow, or takamakura, a lacquered block with a small cushion tied to it, meant to protect carefully styled hair, but also inadvertently great for neck pain. Still he sleeps, because sleep in Edo didn't wait for perfection. It waited for exhaustion. Then there's the seasonal worker, curled in a storehouse loft, wrapped in nothing but a borrowed tanzen, a padded robe shared between shifts. He doesn't own it, but for now it's his armor against the cold breath of the warehouse's clay walls. And what about the traveling merchant? He stopped at a roadside inn, his belongings bound tightly in a furoshiki cloth beside him. For nightwear, he loosens his outer kimono, layers it over his feet, and rolls his thinner travel robe into a makeshift pillow. Privacy. Not much. Comfort enough. Many of Edo's working poor did not own multiple sets of clothing. What you wore to work might become what you slept in. And if you were lucky enough to own a single yukata, you wore it until it wore out. Then you mended it again and again until it resembled more memory than fabric. There's even a phrase for that, boro, literally rags. But in today's world, it's also an art form patchwork, layering the quiet beauty of endurance sewn into every stitch. Your great-grandfather's robe becomes your nightshirt, becomes your child's blanket. A whole philosophy of reuse and remembrance woven into the twilight. Historians still argue whether boro was born from poverty or practicality, whether it was necessity or quiet rebellion. But the end result was the same: nothing was wasted, especially not warmth. And if you think the upper classes were immune to cold nights and patched sleeves, think again. In high-ranking samurai households, the sleeping chambers were more lavish, sure. Silk-lined futons, brocade cushions, perhaps even small lacquered screens between beds for privacy. But when it came to bedtime attire, even lords favored the humble. Most wore simple white or undyed cotton, nemaki, a kind of sleeping kimono, looser than formal wear, tied with soft cloth belts instead of stiff sashes. Think pajama robe, but with elegance. Even with access to silk and brocade, they knew cotton breathed better, moved better, and most importantly, slept better. You can have power, but if your nightgown is itchy, you've already lost the war. Even within a single household, nightwear became a kind of quiet democracy. The daughter of a samurai might sleep in hand-me-down robes with stitched symbols of her mother's family. The cook might be permitted a cast-off yukata once worn by a guest. Servants curled in side rooms, their beds just folded straw mats kept their own worn garments beneath their heads, like hidden inheritance. And let's not forget the bathhouse. Because in Edo, Japan, you didn't go to bed dirty. Baths weren't just about hygiene, they were ritual, communal, cleansing both body and spirit before slipping beneath the covers. In fact, many people timed their baths around dusk so they could go from the steamy sento directly into their night clothes. You step out skin pink and steaming hair combed back, slipping into your cleanest yukata. The scent of cedar still clings to your skin. The cotton folds around you like a second sleep. Maybe you sip tea. Maybe you light a mosquito coil. But everything that came before, it's washed away now. And that's the secret of nightwear in Edo. It wasn't just what you wore. It was how it made you feel. Safe, seen, settled, and every thread carried a story. One yukata might be dyed with indigo, deep and rich, believed to repel insects and spirits alike. Another might be plain white, a color of purity, but also of endings. Sometimes children's robes were stitched with tiny talismans or painted animals for protection. Sometimes lovers exchanged cords or sleeves, or bits of trim, a quiet promise to dream together even apart. There's one old story of a woman who embroidered her thoughts into her husband's sleep robe while he was away. A single line of poetry stitched inside the hem, invisible unless you turned the garment inside out. When he finally did, he cried, sleepwear as secret letter, as lullaby, as time capsule. So tonight, as you shift beneath your own sheets, modern maybe but still warmed by the weight of ritual, imagine what someone might read in your blanket folds. What stories your hoodie or nightgown might whisper. If someone listened hard enough, maybe they'd hear the day's laughter still trapped in the collar, or the salt of old tears caught in the sleeve. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd hear you breathing slow and steady like the second act of a lullaby once sung in another language. You close your eyes, the cotton softens, the wind hushes, and the dreams drift in, wearing yukata. You're dreaming, but the fabric of the dream feels real, textured, like old cotton, familiar, like a sleeve worn thin from years of turning down beds and folding corners just so. Because by now you know the story of what people wore to bed in Edo, Japan isn't a single thread. It's a whole loom. And tonight you tug on one last strand, the world of the unexpected. Start with the seasons. Because bedtime in summer, that was practically a battle. Without electric fans or AC, you did what you could. You opened sliding doors to coax a breeze, set bowls of water near your futon to cool the air, and wore the thinnest yukata you could find, sometimes even skipping the belt, just to let the night move more freely across your skin. It wasn't unusual for people to sleep on bamboo mats, soaked in cold water, or to place a chilled stone inside a towel and tuck it near their chest like a sleeping ice pet. One quirky fact: some households in Edo, Japan, hung wind chimes not just for aesthetics, but as psychological cooling. The tinkling sound triggered the suggestion of breeze, which made people feel cooler. Did it work? Not always. But hey, placebo dreams are still dreams. And then winter, Edo winter, when the wind swept through paper walls and the chill made your breath visible even indoors. This is when layers mattered most. Padded kimono, tanzin, came back with a vengeance, often layered over sleep robes, like sleepy samurai armor. People slept with hot stones wrapped in cloth, or lay curled around hibachi embers, carefully managed in clay pots. One fringe tidbit: some households used charcoal-filled foot warmers under the covers, but these came with warnings. Too close to your futon and poof, fire hazard. Too close to your nose, and, well, let's just say carbon monoxide has never made for sweet dreams. And yet people managed. They had to. Because whether you were noble merchant craftsman or thief, sleep was the great equalizer and nightwear. That was your second skin. By now you've realized it was never just about clothing. It was about ritual. Take the hair, for example. Many women styled theirs elaborately during the day, arrangements of lacquered combs and pins and shapes held stiff with wax. But before bed, you didn't undo it entirely. Instead, you protected it. A wooden pillow, or takamakura, cradled the neck while leaving the hair untouched. Sound comfortable? Spoiler, it wasn't. But it was worth it for the style points. Waking up with hair intact was like winning a silent beauty pageant at sunrise. Some girls, especially in merchant families, even practiced sleeping with their heads suspended, training themselves to stay still all night, neck balanced on that little block like a trust exercise with gravity. As for men, most kept things simple. A loose robe, maybe tucked at the waist with a soft cord. Sometimes bare-chested in summer, sometimes wrapped in 2 layers during colder months, but always modest. Even the rowdiest among them knew not to let indecency wander into the room like a draft. And now let's open a rarely discussed closet nightwear for children and elders. Babies slept swaddled in quilted wraps called shitone, usually padded with scraps of worn kimono. The goal was warmth, security, and in some cases, immobilization. Because in crowded houses, a rolling baby could become a very mobile fire hazard. Elders, on the other hand, often had dedicated sleep robes, lighter, looser, easier to manage. Some even stitched small charms into the collars for protection against illness, against bad dreams, or sweetly against loneliness. There's a belief that the nemaki, or sleep kimono, absorbed more than body heat. It absorbed emotion, time. And when someone passed away, their robe was sometimes kept folded in their chest, not burned, not sold, just held, as if the wrinkles still remembered the way they used to breathe. Historians still argue whether these garments were ever formally classified or labeled by nightwear codes. But in practice, people knew. They knew which robe was for bed, which one carried the right smell, the right feel, the one you reached for without thinking, and occasionally, the one you lent to someone else. Because even in Edo, people had sleepovers. Travelers arrived late. Cousins visited. Children got scared by a thunderclap and crawled under another futon. And what you wore to bed became a temporary gift, a loan of softness, a thread of hospitality. One story from a late Edo diary tells of a young apprentice who tore his only yukata climbing a fence. His master didn't scold him. He gave him his own sleeping robe instead and told him to wear it with pride until he earned his own. That night, the apprentice slept better than he ever had, because bedtime clothes didn't just wrap your body. They wrapped your sense of belonging. So tonight, as your own covers gather around you, modern mismatched, maybe not stitched by hand, but still full of story. Imagine the cloths of old Edo folding over you, each one carrying a memory. Maybe a robe passed down through 3 generations. Maybe a patched yukata that saw too many summers. Maybe a child's wrap embroidered with guardian cranes and worn until it unraveled into bedtime dust. They're gone now, but they live in threads. And threads, they don't forget. You curl deeper into your bed, not like a samurai, not like a merchant, just like a dreamer. And you feel the softness of time settle over your shoulders, the way it did for them, the way it always will. Your dreams tonight are slower, less like movies, more like memories that don't belong to you, woven from fabric scraps and candlelight, and that soft sound straw mats make when someone rolls over gently beside you. Because by now, you're not just visiting Edo, Japan, you're sleeping there. And sleep here is serious business. So let's drift toward the final layer of night, those hidden customs, the moments between wakefulness and dreaming, and the whispered habits that filled the space just before the oil lamps were pinched out. Start with the firelight. No one simply blew out a candle. You pinched the flame with damp fingers or used a metal snuffer. Because fire, as always, was friend and threat. A single spark, a bad roll in bed, and half a neighborhood could vanish in smoke. Some households kept a small bowl of water by the bedding just in case. Not for thirst, for defense. The wealthier houses sometimes used Andin paper lanterns with oil wicks, protected by wooden frames. Their glow, gentle, warm, the kind of light that made shadows look like silk. But once the lights were out, voices didn't stop. People talked. Quietly, yes, but not always seriously. Because nighttime in Edo wasn't just for sleep. It was for connection, pillow talk, gossip, reciting poems you made up 5 seconds ago, whispering fears into the dark so they'd shrink by morning. A quirky custom. Some kids and even adults would play a sleep game called Hyakumonogatari, a kind of ghost story marathon. You lit 100 candles and told 100 scary tales. After each story, you blew out 1 light. By the time the room was completely dark, legend said a spirit might appear. Yeah. Imagine explaining that to your futon mate when the shadows got a little too real. And while we're on ghosts, let's talk beliefs. Because bedtime in Edo came with a spiritual side. Many homes kept small shrines near the sleeping area, and it wasn't uncommon to offer a silent thanks before lying down. Not dramatic, not ritualized, just a breath, a nod, a thought sent upward or inward. Some elders believed that your soul wandered during sleep, not metaphorically, literally, which is why some people tied a small charm near the pillow to help the soul find its way back before dawn. And if you dreamed of someone you loved who had passed, you were considered lucky. It meant they were visiting, checking in, tucking you in maybe. Now think of the noise, or rather, the lack of it. No clocks ticking, no phones buzzing, just the natural symphony frogs whined, sometimes the clack of Geta sandals if someone walked past too late. And if you were lucky or unlucky, maybe the haunting echo of a night watchman striking his wooden clappers as he walked the neighborhood, calling out the time and reminding people to check their fires. There was something grounding in that sound, like the world still had order, even at midnight, even in dreams. Historians still argue whether the night truly belonged to the poor or the privileged in Edo. After all, rich families had thicker bedding, private rooms, guards. But some say the simplicity of peasant life offered its own kind of rest, undisturbed by worry over politics, poetry rankings, or whether your sleeve silk matched your status. Either way, people slept. They had to. Because the next day always came early. The rooster was relentless. The vendors even more so. And let's be honest, rolling up a futon at dawn after twisting yourself into a sleep knot on a wooden neck block, that required stamina. But here's the soft truth. No matter the class, no matter the clothes, everyone wore their hopes to bed. Maybe tucked into the collar of a yukata, maybe stitched in the edge of a sleeve, maybe folded quietly under the pillow. A samurai hoping not to be called to duel tomorrow. A merchant hoping the rice market doesn't crash again. A child hoping the dream about the fox spirit is a nice one this time. And now here you are, in your own world, on your own bed, but maybe feeling just a little closer to theirs. Because you know how it feels to wear something soft, to lay your head down with a whisper of uncertainty, to hold on to a charm or a strand of hope like it's made of silk. And as the Edo night folds itself around you for the last time, you realize it's not gone. Not really. The customs fade, the houses fall, but the stories, they become lullabies. And now the final one plays. It hums across your ears in a language half forgotten, yet familiar. You're warm. Your thoughts are folding like laundry. Your heartbeat has joined the rhythm of old Edo inhale. As someone adjusts the futon. Exhale. As a lantern dims. Inhale. As a cat pads across the rooftop. Exhale. As someone dreams of plum blossoms falling in slow motion. And now the wind has quieted. The world leans in. And the fabric of your sleep finally settles. So now, just lie there. You've wandered through narrow alleys lit by oil lamps, peeked into old sleeping rooms lined with rice straw mats, and tried on robes made for nights when poetry mattered more than temperature. Let yourself soften, just like those old cotton yukata rumpled comfortable reel, the kind that smells like memories. You don't need to fix anything right now. Not your posture, not your thoughts. Just let them sway a little like paper doors in the evening breeze. The world of Edo has gone to sleep. So can you. You're not carrying messages across feudal borders. You're not preparing for battle or reciting haiku into your pillow. You're just breathing. And that's enough. Let the stories fade like shadows on a rice screen. Let the drums hush. Let the night wrap you in its quiet version of armor. Soft. Worn. Yours. And when morning comes, your blanket will feel like that first morning sunlight creeping through a wooden shutter. Slow, gentle, honest. Because you're not waking into chaos. You're waking into the next chapter. And whatever it holds, you've already survived centuries, so you'll be fine. You're fine. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Maybe by now you've already drifted off to sleep, and if so, we hope this story brought you peace of mind and helped you rest a little easier. Deep sleep makes life better, and we're truly happy to be part of that. Until next time, sweet dreams.